Welcome to Dialogue 6 in the Civil Institute Vision 2030 series. My name is Belinda Chaora and I am your facilitator for today. And of course, Vision 2030 is, Zimbabwe's Vision 2030 is related to our aspiration as a country to become an upper middle income economy by 2030. The last few weeks, since the 22nd of September, we've been discussing a number of important topics, all of them related to Vision 2030. We've gone through the need for a vision process. Why do we even need to be envisioned as a country? Where are we currently with a sort of envisioning and a uniting sort of process? We've done an overview of Zimbabwe today, looking at where we are as an economy, and we looked at the prospects for moving forward. We looked at our economy, and we looked at stable economy, trade relations, and how we can re-engage with the world. We also then took a look at agriculture and mining to achieve Vision 2030, and then social policy frameworks for inclusive growth, all of this with the aspiration to achieve an inclusive upper middle income economy by 2030. So like I said, my name is Belinda Chaora. Today, we are going to be discussing peace, justice, and strong institutions. And of course, this dialogue series is hosted by Civil Institute. We are partnering with Heart and Soul TV. I'm sure if you're watching us in our Zoom room or on our Facebook pages, you'll notice you can catch us live on our Civil Institute Facebook page, on Heart and Soul TV, as well as Newsday Zimbabwe. Our hashtags, if you are online, even during the dialogue, feel free to connect with us online. We are working with the dialogue with hashtags, towards an inclusive society, Catalyzing Vision 2030, and Zim Vision 2030. We have been bringing these dialogues, bring different people together in these dialogues with the hope of developing a consensus on what it means and what it will take to achieve an upper middle income economy, or as we commonly know it, Vision 2030. We wanted to create some form of collaboration between different stakeholders, so in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And we wanted to agree on the process of mutual accountability between the state and non-state actors. So we've had a vast number of people bringing contributions. And like I said, today is bittersweet because this is our 6th in the series, and it was a 6-part series. So today is the last dialogue that we're hosting in 2021 related to Vision 2030. Today, we are going to be joined by a number of amazing people. We've got Deprose Muchena from Amnesty International, Trust Mamombe from the Institute of Economics and Peace, and we've got Zenzele Ndebele, who is a journalist, and many of you know him, an entrepreneur, a media consultant, and he is the director of CITE. So we're going to get straight into it. I'll invite up Dr. Marisa. Dr. Marisa is the Executive Director of Civil Institute. And as I said, Civil Institute is the host of this dialogue series. Tendai Marisa is passionate about Africa, citizen agency, researching on a number of topics to do with social policy, land reform, philanthropy, all of those things in the context of Zimbabwe, but then also with a focus on the African continent. Dr. Marisa, I'll invite you to talk to us about why peace, justice, and strong institutions are important for Vision 2030, looking back at the dialogues that we've already done, and then also kind of talking forward about what we hope to achieve with this dialogue series. Dr. Marisa, I'll hand over to you.
Good morning, colleagues, and welcome. Good morning, and thanks, Belinda, for this opportunity. Yeah, I think it's bittersweet, but I think as you can see, even on the video, our faces are looking a bit tired. It's been a marathon, and we're glad we are here. But it's also something that we recognize that you can't put an important process like a visioning process over 6 webinars and think you have resolved it. There's still a lot of outstanding issues that we have not even started to grapple with. And some issues that we discussed, we literally just scratched the surface. So we're looking forward to a continuation of this at some point, or a different version of this at some point. Our objective from the beginning was always to say we need to make sure that we bring on board, or we establish a platform that is non-partisan in nature, given our polarization anyways, that is objective in terms of analysis, that also seeks to deal with the different facets that are required for nation building. We see Vision 2030 not only as a vision in process, but also as a nation building project. And in it, you cannot just think of achieving certain economic goals, achieving a certain status before you have dealt with what maybe we may refer to as the software of a country. The software of a country, what is required, the conditions that are required for you to achieve an inclusive upper middle income status have to do with peace, justice, and also strong institutions. There are a lot of historical injustices that our country has not yet adequately dealt with. And we feel like there are certain people within Zimbabwe who do not feel as if they're part of Zimbabwe because they have always been alienated since maybe pre-independence and even just at the birthing of our country. So many things happened. A genocide took place and it has not been resolved. So I think there are so many issues that some people are saying, how can we talk about going forward when we have not resolved the issues that are making who we are right now, the bitterness that is in this country? How do we resolve that? We hope that today we'll be able to grapple with all those difficult issues, but necessary for us as a country when we're going forward to begin to say, if we've not resolved this, we're not moving forward. So we've learned a lot in the past months since September. The road is going to be long and hard. There are certain hard issues that we have to deal with. And one of them is the conversation we're going to have today about peace, justice, and strong institutions, and what is needed for us to move forward as a country. And we also learned that we'll need political will to resolve some of the hard issues that we're dealing with. These are structural, historical, and systemic issues that need to be addressed. So there's need for serious investment in political will and risk-taking on the part of office holders to address some of these issues. But also we noticed, and we speak boldly about this, citizens' mindsets will need to change. As a country, we've become, for too long, we've become polarized on partisan lines, that identities are formed across two political positions. But we need to begin to sort of project what we call the Zimbabwe we want, the Zimbabwe project, that is above political party identity, that is above political party rhetoric, but a project to do with national development, national healing, and national progress outside of our narrow identities that we've given each other so far. Then we also realized and we learned that there will be need for serious international re-engagement. It is incumbent upon the current government to begin to institute the reforms that are required for that kind of sort of re-engagement to take place. But also we learned that when it comes to the international community, there's been some exceptionalism when it comes to dealing with Zimbabwe. The punishment that has been meted against Zimbabwe is not something that is necessarily unique to Zimbabwe. We see it as a problem that cuts across Africa. So at times we tend to analyze Zimbabwe in exception. So there's the Zimbabwean exceptionalism in the international community, even amongst us as Zimbabweans. When we analyze, we do not really ground our analysis in what is taking place in Zimbabwe. It's interesting in the sense that for the first time, I saw people really getting sort of angry with the travel ban that has been imposed against Southern Africa. They say, oh, this is unwarranted action, whatever. Zimbabwe has been facing these kinds of injustice for more years now. We've been isolated for longer based on accusations that have been done on things that we see in many other African countries. I'm not saying we're justifying them, but we're just saying that at times the international community responds harshly, and that response does not help us to recover or even to find a way of resolving the problems that we're facing. And we also realize that for us to achieve Vision 2030, we'll have to take cognizance of certain risks that we cannot control. COVID-19 is one of them. Droughts, cyclical droughts that come after every 3 or 4 years, and climate change. These are issues that we have to deal with and to begin to plan around them, understanding that there are going to be disruptions to well-written plans. And also there will be need for policy consistency across. We cannot come up with one policy today, change it over 30 days because it's not working for certain elites. We really need to come up with policy consistency, especially when it comes to those policies that target the vulnerable within society and that target the achievement of inclusive development. And even then, we still need to find a pro-poor compact or a pro-poor consensus. Currently, it's lacking in the current government. So these are the things that we've learned. And like I'm excited, we've got hard hitters today. These are brothers that we have worked with, and we're excited that they are here today. And we're looking forward to a discussion on saying, how do we grapple with issues to do with peace, justice, and also establishment of strong institutions Back to you, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marisa, for helping us understand why we need peace, justice, and strong institutions for us to achieve Vision 2030. Now, first up, I'm going to call Carlos Montes. Carlos is the lead advisor for the Legatum Institute's Pathways to Prosperity program. Carlos graced us with his presence last week when we were discussing agriculture and mining to achieve Vision 2030. And why Legatum Institute, you may be asking? Well, Legatum Institute has done research on Zimbabwe, as well as many other countries, through a series of reports called Pathways to Prosperity reports. And so that's why we've invited him here today to kind of give us their assessment when they looked at Zimbabwe and looking at the topics that were discussed, the peace, justice, and strong institutions. What did Legatum Institute find? And how would they say are the key issues? What would they say are the key issues that Zimbabwe needs to address for it to have a peaceful society, which is just and has strong institutions? So, Carlos, I'll hand over to you. Please feel free to give us your presentation in less than 10 minutes, and then we can go on to our next speaker. Sorry, just unmute your mic, Carlos. I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Belinda, and thank you for the invitation. And it's very nice to hear Tendai and the points that he makes, and particularly this issue of exceptionalism, because I think, as he mentioned, I think it's important to see things in the context of institutional factors and not to just concentrate in a country. And and I think that what we're discussing about how to have strong institutions is an issue that affects not just Zimbabwe, but most of the countries in Africa and indeed the world. So I will start by saying that I wanted to join the Legatum Institute precisely because the index that measures prosperity that we construct focuses not just in economic and social indicators, but includes political factors, what define inclusive society, including safety and security, personal freedom, governance, and social capital. And today's discussion focuses on these issues. The political scientist Francis Fukuyama postulates that countries are poor, not because they lack resources, but because they lack effective institutions. As Tendai suggested, it's kind of the software of governments, and that's the area that we're focusing today. Fukuyama's research finds that political order, in particular, is based on a strong, capable state, the state subordination of these states to the rule of law, and the accountability, the political accountability, or the responsiveness of the government to all citizens. And these variables change according to different countries, in different countries. The balance of these factors is not obtained easily. Maybe it is a bit in Denmark, but for example, China gives priority to having a strong state. Our work on how nations succeed follows this analysis and matches what Tendai was discussing in terms of having a Zimbabwe project, a national development project, a national healing. That work describes how promoting an inclusive national identity and building a common vision for the future is essential to support national development, and also that it's important to govern in ways that support legitimacy. That means without using excessive use of force and respecting the rule of law. That we find in Legatum that these political factors are the ones that constrain prosperity the most. In all the countries that we go to, I just came back with Stephen, Brian, the colleague that you know has been also participant in these seminars, and I came from Peru, my own country, where the economy has been growing solidly for the last 20 years, and still because of political issues, there is a strong political polarization and the lowest levels of trust in politicians and governments in the entire world. You know, we are only 2 or 3 from the bottom, and the population has just elected a left-wing government that is closing profitable mines. So these, as Tendai suggests, are issues that cut across the world. But looking at Zimbabwe, we think that there is a great opportunity to, in this Vision 2030, to become one of the most prosperous countries in Africa. But the realization of this opportunity depends, and here, Tendai again suggested, all the risk-taking that needs to happen, how to look at the issues that have not been resolved. But it requires that the heroes of the Chimurenga War, working hand in hand with the rest of Zimbabweans, work towards reconciliation. This reconciliation can bequest a prosperous future for all children and grandchildren in Zimbabwe, because politics matters. The war of liberation made possible a Zimbabwe with a strong state, strong legitimacy, and progressive changes in land reform, education, and health that you all know about. However, the polarization and political struggles since independence have resulted in deep divisions in the country. These political factors and economic crisis have contributed also to weaken that initially strong state capacity. Executive constraints to the executive have been gradually eroded by the ruling government through constitutional amendments as a way to consolidate political power. Political parties and civil society have been weakened through this process, also reducing political accountability. Judiciary independence and the rule of law have also been weakened, with the government ignoring judicial rulings. The military has been a guarantor of political order that has not allowed for a peaceful transfer of power. So these are all issues that need to be dealt. And polarization has resulted in a situation where part of the population sees the military and the party and the ruling party as a force of repression and corruption, while the ruling party and their supporters see the opposition as not caring for Zimbabweans' interests, but for those of foreign powers. So these are the lines that Tendai suggested as well, in terms of the parties and lines that people are taking, the polarization of people into 2 positions without listening to each other, which again is something that not only happens in this country, but I came from Peru, where a similar process had been taking place. But political intolerance has become a dominant political culture, resulted in close networks and not much dialogue between different political positions. Trust has broken down. People are cautious in their dealing with other people, and all these issues can be seen in the indicators that we use at the political at our index of prosperity. But this denies the country the win-win opportunities that we mentioned can make of Zimbabwe one of the prosperous countries in Africa. Breaking this polarization is the key step to unlock Zimbabwe's great economic potential. There is a need of a dialogue and a sort of reconciliation for prosperity agreement that resets in a fundamental way the Zimbabwean political and economic structures. But this process can only be done taking risks, and he has been done by Zimbabweans, not by external forces, not by international pressures, but by Zimbabweans. And they recognizing that the limitations of the present situation, and they need to start, you need to start engaging in frank conversations to build trust, because trust is the first element, that allows possible these conversations, and ultimately to share a vision of what's a more sustainable and inclusive future. the dialogue must meet all stakeholders' fundamental aspirations. And I think this point is important. Given that the changes in Zimbabwean society depends in great measure on the acquiescence of the ruling party and the military, we believe that any reconciliation agreement needs to provide political and economic guarantees that secure the support of the ruling party and the military. For example, on the irreversibility of the land reform. Or for example, the military withdrawing from party politics and the running of the state, but being able to keep full autonomy on security issues. The new social compact for prosperity should ensure that the rule of law applies to the state and is backed gradually by an independent judiciary. It is also needed that more constraints in the power of the executive are introduced to support the building of political accountability. And to end, the state must be protected from undue political influence and the military to ensure that it can deliver effectively for all citizens. Only when a degree of rule of law and political accountability is instituted, it will be possible to build a stronger and more effective state. No society finds it easy to build a strong state subordinated to the rule of law and political accountability. However, Zimbabwe has already made strong strides through the achievements of the War of Independence, and few countries would reap more benefits from reconciliation than Zimbabwe, given its wealth, but also the high levels of education of its population. Thank you.
Carlos, thank you so much for that. You've raised some interesting points, and I would have wanted to proceed quickly, but I think I know you also need to leave early. So I'm going to, Dr. Marisa, if I could pin you, and just what are your thoughts on what Carlos has shared? Some of the key things that he's raised were when you are looking at Zimbabwe and you are focusing on looking at our level of education and just the gains that we've made as a country already. It just seems that our creating a unified country is the one thing that would bring Zimbabwe forward. So not sure, Dr. Marisa, what your thoughts are very quickly before I move to trust.
I think what is critical in it is that Carlos raises and recognizes the elephant in the room, the challenge of, number one, polarization, and number two, the challenge of the challenging position that we have right now of the very dominant role of the military setup in Zimbabwe. So I think those two have sort of hindered participation in the public space, effective participation. So there's a lot of tokenism, or what we look like something, but we're not that. Then we have failed to harness on the education dividend, you know, the high literacy rates and whatever. And it's embarrassing that we always see most of our people doing well outside of Zimbabwe. Whenever they go outside of Zimbabwe, they become stars. So I think it's the effect of the enabling environment, which should really be the primary role of the state, an enabling environment for citizens to thrive. But that enabling environment can only be achieved, and I don't want to preempt what Deprose is going to be talking about when you're looking at strong institutions, the traditional separation of powers, and autonomy of certain institutions. It's very necessary for us to move forward. And if we do not deal with these at the foundational years of Vision 2030, we are joking. If we do not deal with polarization, if we do not deal with the military complex in our government, if we do not deal with creating an enabling environment where we do not invest in trust, because at the moment, these high levels of mistrust between government and its citizens are worrying. It's difficult for us to come together without checking behind each other's shoulders to say, whose agenda are we promoting? Just to come and say we are promoting the agenda that we can call Zimbabwe. So I totally welcome the idea that Carlos puts on the table to say there's need for a dialogue or a series of dialogues that sort of de-escalates the kind of tensions that are in this country, where we begin to actually have serious conversations, where we begin to invest in each other's capabilities, because at the moment we are not. So I don't want to make another presentation, but thank you so much.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much, Dr. Marisa. And, you know, Carlos, thank you so much for that presentation. Please stay on for as long as you're able, and I'll keep chatting with you in the chat. I'm going to move quickly to Trust, and Trust Mamombe. If I'm sure you've listened to what Carlos has shared, and of course, you know, making your presentation, you are going to be talking about peace and how Zimbabwe can become a peaceful society. And just as Trust is coming up, I'm going to just introduce him quickly. Trust is the regional director for the Institute of Economics and Peace, and is the founding director of the National Peace Trust. And of course, the National Peace Trust, the broad goals are to guide the national development at all levels in a peace context, and to create a consolidated infrastructure for durable peace in Zimbabwe. So that is Trust Mamombe. Trust, I'll invite you to unmute your mic and turn on your video. And just to respond to what Carlos has shared, Carlos kind of framed his overview of where Zimbabwe is and what Zimbabwe needs to do. You know, so he kind of gave a broad overview. But you've done a lot of work in Zimbabwe. You are based here in Zimbabwe, and you know what Zimbabwe needs to do to deal with where there is lack of peace, or to create an environment that is more peaceful. So I'll hand over to you, and just very quickly, what is our state of affairs as a country with regards to creating a peaceful framework?
Thank you very much, Belinda. And many thanks to Tendai and team there at Civio for the invitation. It's an honor for me to share with you a few perspectives of where we are at with respect to peace. As you indicated, I am from the Institute for Economics and Peace, and broadly our work is to measure peace. We, of course, not only measure peace, but we design conceptual frameworks for societies to be able to look even better at how they fare with respect to peace. I will do two things in the next 10 to 15 minutes, Belinda. Just show you the state of peace in Zimbabwe, and that's first. And then secondly, maybe try and grapple with a framework for how we can become a much more peaceful society. I'll be quick to say that I'll make reference to the Global Peace Index, which I believe is one of the foremost products with respect to looking at the peace of any society. Zimbabwe is ranked 133 out of 163 countries, which is 99.7% of the global population. Now, being ranked 133 out of 163 countries is not a good position at all. And it's difficult to even try and gloss that away. That means we are literally in the bottom 40 in terms of peacefulness in this country, in the world. Now, our lack of peace may be difficult for particularly Zimbabweans, I've discovered, to say we are that bad, because when you go out into our streets, you do not see or hear gunshots. People are not willy-nilly fighting. So it's difficult sometimes to appreciate why we fare so badly. But our faring badly from the perspective of the Global Peace Index is that we have not done too well in terms of measures of ongoing internal conflict. And conflict may not necessarily mean that it is violent at any given point in time. The level of political intolerance in our country brings our rankings to a very, very low rate. Secondly, the deteriorating democratic spaces are something that again weighs down on our peace in Zimbabwe. Political instability is high. We live in a society where things are tense from one election to the other, and that has not helped us in any way. Of course, the demands for political stability, demands for political spaces is a call that is there from one election to the other. And we have not done very well in that. We have not done well in terms of societal safety. And I think, as Tendai said in his past remarks, we live in a place where you cannot even air your, what you would consider your constructive position with regards to where we should go as a country, because of the fear factor that we have. We live in a society that is filled with the fear. The militarization component, I think we don't even have to talk about it. We live in a society where there is that feel, perceived or not. And I think I should also underline that it may not necessarily be factual positions, but perception matters. If your perceptions are that you're living in a fearful society, you are therefore guided by that perception and that fear. So we are ranked 133 out of 163. And this is the negative piece. In other words, your sense of the absence of violence. But that is not bad. If you thought 133 out of 163 countries is bad, there is what we call the positive peace index, which is basically your stockpiles of peace. In other words, where are we going? So in other words, if we thought 133 is bad, our rankings on the positive peace index, 153 out of 163 countries. Now that literally puts us in the bottom 11 of the world's rankings. And by the positive peace index, you're looking at where we are going to be at in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 1 year. You're looking at your stockpiles of peace. And we do not rank well in that. We use what we call 8 pillars of peace to do the rankings, which cover 24 indicators. And these indicators include issues such as press freedom, group grievances, control of corruption, perception of corruption, and enrollment, the freedom of speech, and so forth. Now, when we look at those, where we are going looks even worse, because things have, the investments that we have made in these areas are bad. Now, having painted that very dark and gloomy picture about where we are at in terms of peace, trust me, again, maybe just to graphically put it, sometimes you hear people saying, how come there are no gunshots? Again, things like the economy, our inflation rates, our interest rates, our employment rates, and so forth, they speak to the level of peacefulness that you may have. While people may not be fighting out there, but the fact that we have people that are living on less than $1 a day, eating a meal a day, no access to water, spending bulk of their time queuing up for water in urban areas, and having to walk even further in rural settings. That alone, it does not add well in terms of our peacefulness. But I don't want to deal and dwell so much on where we are at in terms of the state of peace in Zimbabwe. It is not a good picture by any measure. Both what we are actually facing right now and where we are, what we are actually experiencing right now, and the prospects for the same peace in the future. Now, probably I will then look at how do we create an inclusive peace framework in Zimbabwe. I think 2 things I need to quickly highlight is that peace is not an accident. We don't just wake up one morning and we are a peaceful society. There's tolerance, there's political stability, there's no polarization in our society, and people are not on each other's throats because of political contestations and differences that have not been dealt with over the past years and decades. Now, peace is invested in. Now, I spoke about positive peace. We define positive peace as the attitudes, the institutions, and the structures that sustain peace. In other words, what are our attitudes? What are the embedded norms of our society with regards to how we deal with one another? What are the institutions that are supposed to support peace like? How are we at in terms of institutional strengths and building? What are the structures? In other words, the relationships between the different institutions. We, again, as I've said, have not done well. But one thing is, as I've said, peace is not an accident. We need to invest in peace. We need to make very informed decisions that are clear that this is where we are at. And by the way, the importance of knowing where we are at, particularly in terms of empirical data or numerically, is that it is difficult to say we want to go to point B or point C when you don't know where you are at. We need to be clear, just like any strategic reserves of a society, maybe grain reserves. We are clear that, say, Zimbabwe has 6 months strategic grain reserves. We also need clarity in terms of our stockpiles of peace. And by the way, measuring 153 out of 163 simply tells you that our stockpiles of peace are very low. In other words, if a madman were to come into our society today with the matchstick, the paraffin, so to speak, is all over the place. A little matchstick thrown into our society will cause serious pandemonium. In other words, our stockpiles are at a very, very all-time low. Now, with all-time low stockpiles of peace, we need to be very clear about what do we do in order to increase the stockpiles of peace. And it comes to my second point, which is the investments that we need to make with regards to peace. It will be very unfortunate for a society like ours to think that an institution, with all due respect, or an organization, for example, our foremost peace infrastructure, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, it will be very unfair to ourselves to think that an institution like that is responsible and can be responsible for the prospects of a better and more peaceful society that we all desire to have. It would be very unfortunate to think that the NPRC or any other peace institutions are responsible and play the very big role in terms of ensuring that we have sustainable peace or we have better peace in our society in the coming season. No, it doesn't work that way. We need to understand that every work is peace work. And this is where we need to work on in terms of a framework for building peace in Zimbabwe. It cannot be that organization, that institution, or that area, not even a government or an administration area alone with respect to peace building. The framework for peace must be holistic. In other words, we should be able to sit down and say, where do we stand at in, say, the 8 areas which we consider are the 8 pillars of peace? Where do we stand at with regards to government effectiveness? Because if we ignore government effectiveness, I'm not even getting into modes of government, whether we are a democratic society or an authoritarian society. Government effectiveness speaks to issues such as service delivery, our local councils. And if there's no effective service delivery, trust me, we are digging deep in terms of our graves for the absence of peace in the near future. Government effectiveness deals with issues of service delivery, the water issues that I talk about. I actually, just to demonstrate how important not just central government is to the prospects for peace, the garbage man himself. If the garbage man does not collect garbage between me and Tendai, after a week or 2, 3 months, as can possibly happen in our societies, we start sharing and throwing garbage into each other's yards. What happens? We start fighting. And of course, we'll be quick to say, let's go to this Peace Institute to go and see what the peace roots of peace analysis and frameworks look like. But no, it's the garbage man. If the garbage man doesn't do his job, if the garbage man doesn't deliver what he's supposed to deliver, it puts a dent in terms of our prospects for peace. It takes away the peace dividend that he brings in by doing his job. And because of that, the garbage man, when it comes to peace issues, must be part of the round table. Government effectiveness is one. A sound business environment. We may shout all we want about the need for peace, but if we are not careful about the role of business, for example, and what they have to do in terms of employment creation, that is a sound business environment, in terms of attracting foreign direct investment and so forth, If that does not work, we will remain with the tons of unemployed young people that we have in our streets. Come 2023, which is around the corner, what is going to happen? They will be available for abuse as political abuse, as cannon fodder for violence. And that will be quick to blame political party programs and policies. But if you look carefully, it is not just about political party programs and policies. It is about the absence of opportunities for employment. That is why we are not going to find Tendai Murisa in any participating in political violent activities, because he's probably gainfully employed. So we need to look carefully at those issues when we want to design a framework for peace in our country. Talk about corruption. Corruption is not just about resources going to the wrong places at the wrong time and so forth. Corruption has a very big bearing on the prospects for peace for society. Corruption in the way resources are allocated, corruption in the way expenditures are done, because we tend to think that corruption is where government awards tenders to its parties and so forth. But it goes beyond that. Corruption even at a local level, when the headman allocates certain pieces of land to one family and not to the other, it just creates a sitting time bomb for us. So those things also are important in terms of considering our framework for the prospects for peace. Information. Where are we at with regards to the free flow of information in our society? Where are we at with respect to press freedoms? And those things have a bearing. It's not just about press freedom. Again, it's not about the independence of our media and so forth. It's also about the accuracy of our information. Sitting here as we are today, if this was a physical meeting and someone dashes in and says, all of us will run because of that information. Whether it's accurate that they have come wherever they are or not will be secondary. So those things, in terms of us designing a framework for peace in Zimbabwe, durable, sustainable peace in Zimbabwe, that has to be brought into the fore. Human capital development is also important. The skill set. Even if we open our industries today, but we have lagged behind in working on getting our young people properly skilled and trained, they will be unemployable in spite of the opportunities that come. And we'll see what our neighbors in South Africa are facing up to today, where the opportunities are there, but the locals have difficulties in taking up those opportunities. So human capital development is also important as a significant component of the framework for peace building. Secondly, and rather lastly, the respect of the rights of others. Now this human rights issue, Chair Lady, may look like a very elitist, out there kind of thing, but the rights issue is very critical, and we need as a society to put it into perspective. I always want to give an example of, say, the young women out there in the rural areas. We have no access to sanitary wear. You would say, where does sanitary wear and access to it by young girls in the rural areas contribute to the prospects for peace for Zimbabwe? You'll be surprised. Frustrate those young women. They don't have access to sanitary wear. They miss 7 days a month of going to school while others are trying to catch up in this COVID season. What happens? They don't do too well. In the next seasons, we see them in the red light districts and so forth. Of course, we'll be the first ones to point out and say, look at them. They are this or they are that. But if you look carefully, it was about denial of fundamental rights, rights such as access to sanitary wear. And those things, in their looking so distant away, are critical with response to designing a framework for peace in Zimbabwe. Now, having said that, let me conclude by saying, I could spell out all these important components, the 8 different pillars and stuff like that. But we also need a very serious systems approach in our country. We have gotten to a place where we think we know what is important, what is more important, and what is useless and least important. Now, the systems approach, borrowed from biology, says that there is nothing that is less important than the other. The sum total of the whole is more important than any individual entity. we'll be quick right now to think it's about ZANU-PF and MDC alliance, but we'll be surprised if those things get aligned. Why? Look at the human body. Look at our stomachs. We have the kidneys, the lungs, the liver, the intestines. We have the little pancreas and the appendix. It is easy for us to be so concerned about the big five, the kidney, the heart, yes, especially the heart and the lungs. But the little pancreas and the little appendix could be very fatal in terms of our prospects and our investments for peace, in terms of a framework for peace. So we need to get to a place where we know that the little young men out there in the rural areas, the little CBO that is working in Binga, are very vital when it comes to issues of developing a framework for peace, especially facing Vision 2030 as a nation. Every little segment of our society matters. And I say this here as we go towards a call maybe for dialogue and all sorts of things, that every facet of our society, whether it's business, of course, business, yes. Whether it's civil society, definitely civil society, yes. But how about the unrepresented young men, young women, uneducated and sophisticated people out there? How about the regions that for so long we have neglected? Those may be the little pancreases that could be fatter in terms of our prospects for peace in the coming years. I could go on, but thank you for your attention. Back to you, Belinda. Thank you.
I actually wouldn't have minded if you kept going. I could listen to you all day. You framed the discussion very, very well. And everything that you have said has literally tied and literally just your analysis, just showing that every small bit of work, every sector, no matter how small it seems, actually is very important. So social policy is very important. The kind of education that a young man or young woman in Zimbabwe in the rural context is receiving is very important to my progress and my development. We are interlinked. We are working together as a unit. So I can't think of my progress without thinking about the young man or woman in the rural areas, because those two things have to be thought about together. And you've communicated that very, very well. So like I said, I could listen to you all day and I wouldn't have minded if you had taken a few more minutes. But I have a question though. When I was looking at, I went onto the internet and I looked at the peace index. And just as you said, a lot of people in Zimbabwe would be surprised with how low Zimbabwe ranks. And I noticed very quickly that Haiti, for example, ranks higher than Zimbabwe. And I was thinking there's tension, you know, in Haiti. It has been historic tension. Unemployment, poverty rate might actually be lower. But then when you then went on to explain some of the other indicators that you mentioned, it did make some sense. But, you know, just maybe just to touch on that again, you know, there's some countries that rank, when we look at them at face value, they rank, in our minds, they rank lower. But according to your index, they rank higher. Maybe just to touch on that very quickly about some of the, because you mentioned some of the pillars, maybe just to go in less than a minute, just to explain some of the other pillars, maybe that you didn't touch on, just for those people who might be listening.
Thanks, Belinda. There are two things here. The Global Peace Index, which is a measure of actual peace, what we call negative peace, which is the absence of violence, the absence of fear, and so forth. Now, in terms of ranking, for the Global Peace Index, we use 23 indicators. These include societal safety, militarization, how much are we spending on the military, displaced people, and so forth, a whole range of 23 of them. But just to put things in perspective, we may do very well on one indicator or two indicators, or better still, we may do very well on 7 indicators, which leaves us exposed to 16 other indicators. So you might be fixated on thinking, you know what, look at how well we do on this. Look at our secondary school enrollment. Look at our this year. But then you need to look at the whole range of them. But I'll give you something that will put things in perspective in terms of the graphics of it. Zimbabwe is ranked 133 on the Global Peace Index, which is negative peace. The United States is ranked 128 on the Global Peace Index. In other words, us and the United States are literally in the same bracket. But you say you can't compare Zimbabwe and the United States. We are not involved, for example, in conflicts outside, ongoing military conflicts. So our ratings there are very good. But the United States, because of the ongoing conflicts outside the United States, because of their military expenditure, because of high incarceration rates, their levels go down. So you have to unpack. So you'd say Zimbabwe and the United States are in the same WhatsApp group, so to speak. It can be. But to put again things in perspective, if we move away from the Global Peace Index, which looks at those 23 indicators of peacefulness, and we look at the Positive Peace Index, which looks at your prospects for peace, your stockpiles of peace, Zimbabwe is ranked 153, but the United States is ranked number 26. This is where the difference happens. Why? Because positive peace is about institutions. The United States has strong institutions, that it doesn't matter, with all due respect, whether you bring in an interesting president or not, the institutions remain. The strong institutions are such that even if they are hit by a cyclone on a daily basis, they have quick bouncing back institutions and so forth. Yet in Zimbabwe, we are hit by cyclone because our institutions are not functionally okay, they are not strong. We need 10 years to recover from Cyclone Eileen. So those things have to be unpacked. That's why I said I could really go on. It will take us a whole day session to unpack for each country. But for Zimbabwe, statistics don't lie. We are not faring well. Just put again graphically, 1 second. We had incessant fuel problems in Zimbabwe for the past 3 years. Of course, things were fixed lately in that regard. Our inflation rates are unbelievable. It is only in a society where the fuel tanks are bombed that you find fuel problems. Now, there are no bombs in Zimbabwe. So what was accounting for all these fuel problems? We were behaving like a country that is an Afghanistan setup in terms of bombings and things like that. I'm just saying this here to put things in perspective. Thank you, Belinda.
No, thank you very much. You've helped me because I was looking at it thinking, but no, man. So thank you very much for answering that. And I'm just going to direct a question to you. As I do that, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'll just ask my team to put up a poll that we've got for everyone who is in the Zoom room. Unfortunately, if you are on Facebook, if you're watching this on Facebook, you won't be able to take the poll, but for everyone who is in the Zoom room, you will be able to take it. It's just to get your perspective on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And as I do that, trust this question is for you. It's from Tolbert. And Tolbert obviously first started making a comment saying peace, justice, and strong institutions are vital cogs in the attainment of Vision 2030. And his question is, how best can appreciation of such be practically merged into the education curriculum? So from ECD, the level going all the way up. And then his second question is, do we have a national peace framework for building peace in Zimbabwe? And then he goes on with the third question, what needs to be done now at individual, family, society, and all levels to build a peaceful country? So if you could just answer those questions quickly for us.
Thank you, Belinda. Just quickly, do we have a peace framework for Zimbabwe? Yes. As enunciated by the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which is one of the 12, Chapter 12 commissions that we have here in our country. Now, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission is the foremost peace infrastructure that we have in our country. Now, to say that that framework is comprehensive or all-inclusive is maybe for another day. But in terms of the tone, the good work that has been done there must be definitely recognized. And I think we can build from what the NPRC has set up in terms of their strategy and vision for the coming years. But again, that framework has a time frame. Now, peace issues in terms of investments on peace, do they have a time frame? I guess it comes back to what do we need to do today and now? So the short of it, yes, we do have a framework, but it has to be way more inclusive than what it may be today. And the other question with regards to education, definitely there is no wisdom as a society to be clear about what is important for our society and not have it inculcated in our education system. It is contrary to any thought leadership. You cannot say that peace issues are important, yet someone goes to school all the way from ECD up to university and they don't bump into the word peace except when they're reading about what happened in 1980 and so forth. Now, the ugliness of that is that it's not just about education as in we must be educated. That is very important. But in terms of embedded norms in our society, if you go to certain societies now, certain nations now, there is education on even this matter of peace, all the way from primary school. People are taught about how to work together, we don't teach that, in spite of us putting it as important in our value systems. And definitely a call for an overhaul in our education system is overdue. That is why I until about 2 days ago, I did not understand why Zimbabweans do Roman Dutch law until I discovered it was just a 1965 UDI position, which we still maintain up to today. So as a society, if we think peace is important, we might as well inculcate it into generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering that and for explaining that. I'm going to move now to our next speaker, who I'm sure is no stranger to anyone who is familiar with the media in Zimbabwe on anything to do with justice in Zimbabwe and our history of justice in Ndebele, who is a Bulawayo-based journalist. He's a filmmaker, he's an entrepreneur, he's a human rights activist. He's the founder of the Center for Innovation and Technology. And of course, you may know him for some prominent work that he's done with the Breakfast Club and Asake Online. So he doesn't really need an introduction. He's done quite a lot of work and brought a lot of profile to some of the historic injustices that we've experienced as a country. And my question to you, just as you come on board, Zenzele, thank you so much for making the time. Where are we now? Like when the trust has talked about peace, now we want to talk about justice and our dealing with justice as a country. What would you say, or where would you place Zimbabwe in terms of a just framework, or as a country? Where are we in terms of providing justice for the citizens of Zimbabwe? And have we been able to fairly and equitably apply justice to all the citizens of this country? What would your response be to that?
Thank you very much, Belinda, for that question. And it's sometimes I really wonder whether there is anything called justice in Zimbabwe. I'll start with the current examples, then go back into history. Last night, we tweeted that the deputy sheriff had gone to a farm that is owned by the director of OSISA, Sipomalunga, and his friends to evict the invaders who invaded the farm after the High Court actually gave a judgment that these guys should be evicted until the case is solved. And this morning I saw on Twitter Sipo saying, after the deputy sheriff had evicted these guys, they went back to the farm. And you then ask yourself, is there, the rule of law? Why do people deliberately, ignore such important, court cases? It's contempt of court. And this is a case that we know includes politicians. In sometime last year, I think it was around February or so, at the height of the lockdowns, we reported extensively about 2 women who were brutally beaten up by the police in Cowdrey Park. These two sisters eventually managed to identify the two police officers amongst the 6 that had been arrested, who had arrested them, beat them up, and everything was done. These guys were identified in a parade, taken to court. The case dragged on, and somehow, strangely, within a while, the trial was about to end. The magistrate was transferred from Bulawayo to maybe somewhere in Chipinge. The prosecutor was also transferred. And these guys are stuck now. They don't know what to do, because each time they go to court, they're told that, no, we'll tell you when the prosecutor comes back, or when the magistrate comes back. And I wonder whether these people feel that there is justice in Zimbabwe. Again, last year, we talked about a guy called Paul Munakopa, who was shot by support unit police while sitting in a car with his wife, girlfriend, whatever the circumstances were. But the guy was shot and he was killed. And the police officers were known, they were identified. But up to today, the case is not started trial. These police officers are still at work. Probably, they're going to kill more, God knows until when. So these are clear cases where when you talk about injustice in Zimbabwe, you can tell that there's no justice. I mean, I always talk about Gukurahundi, and it shocks me that there are people who would still think that we would have peace in Zimbabwe when the current government has not really admitted that there was a genocide and people were killed. And the unfortunate part is that we are talking about transitional justice when the perpetrators are still in power. I'll give you 3 examples in this case. There was a lieutenant who was at one brigade. He was a lieutenant of the army, Eddie Asindov. In 1983, he was killed. He was going with his wife and 2 relatives. The wife and the relatives were raped by the 5th Brigade. They killed them, they buried them in a shallow grave. Because he was in the army, there was an inquiry. All the systems tried to cover up this case, but there was pressure from the family. There was a public inquest. It became clear that there was a cover up. The guys eventually faced the trial. The 4 soldiers were convicted to death. They were supposed to hang. Somehow, then they appealed. Then their death sentence was commuted to 26 years. Well, the family would have said, "Oh, okay, there's justice." And then the president of Zimbabwe pardoned these guys. So these guys are somewhere within the echelons of power, somewhere, having been convicted to death for brutalizing a man who was in the army, for that matter, who was not a dissident. And then you ask yourself that, when we are talking about Gukurahundi, probably because we don't know them, I've never come across their names. So maybe we're actually channeling our problems to the same guy who knows that this issue affects him directly. There was a man who was an MP in Zapu. His name was Jin Tuta. Jin Tuta was killed at his farm. Some guys went there and killed him. The official statement was that he was killed by bandits. But then if you then go by that narrative at that time that they were dissidents and dissidents were Zipra, you ask yourself, why would Zipra dissidents kill a senior Zipra member or a ZAPU member? So something went wrong there. Those people were never arrested, the ones who killed Jin Tuta. Then there was the most interesting one. On the 4th of July, 1985, at a house owned by or where Brigadier Chilenlea stayed. Brigadier Chilenlea worked at 4th Brigade in Masvingo. A hand grenade was thrown in his house. And it exploded, broke windows and so forth. There were so many, all the forces came and investigated, because this was the brigadier of the National Army. And no one was arrested. So if that can happen to a brigadier of the National Army, that there's an attempt of his life and no one is arrested, what about the ordinary person in my village in Plumtree? Do they think they will ever face justice? There are millions, there are thousands, not millions, thousands and hundreds of people who up to today don't know what happened to their relatives. And for me, Gukurahundi has been my ministry, because there is a lot of injustice that happened there. And the people who were there at the center of power now are still there. They don't want to talk about it. They pretend to be talking about it. So I would definitely say I feel that the justice system in Zimbabwe sometimes disappoints a lot, and there's a lot of interference. And for me, I feel there is need for institutional reforms. We need to make our institutions to be independent, to make sure that those who commit crimes are accountable. Then I would actually, congratulate the institutions that were there at that particular time, because the courts convicted those who were responsible for killing the Lieutenant Edias Ndlovu. But the president of the day pardoned him, because probably, pardoned them, because probably the president thought they had done a good job. He had assigned them to do the job. So why would he then punish them? So we have a problem of historical injustices that have not been resolved. And because I have the privilege of seeing the polls here, I see that in that question, almost 57% of the people said that we need to address the historical injustice, be they tribal or racial. So definitely we have to. And this is where I have a problem with organizations like NPRC. Because already for me, when I had Kutu saying Gukurahundi was just a tiny bit of their work, I just thought it was a waste of time. I don't think they are capable of addressing the problems that we are facing now. I don't think they are interested in addressing them. I don't think they will address them. So we need to start afresh. We need institutions that are independent, that will deal with issues of historical injustices that are dividing our country, that are dividing our communities. Because whether we like it or not, tribal politics is a big thing in Zimbabwe. Racial politics is a big thing in Zimbabwe. And at one point, we really need to talk about these issues. So I really have a problem. And I don't think, we talk about the Vision 2030. So I'm not sure if maybe they're talking about economic prosperity, maybe, but already we see that our economy is struggling. But I don't see when we get to 2030 where everyone is very much feels protected, feels like justice can be safe. Because you ask yourself, what's the point of going to report to the police if the police are not going to do anything about it? So as long as we don't address the issues of historical injustices, we'll have young people that are very angry, that feel sidelined, and this is a recipe for disaster. I think I'll stop here.
Okay, so you've touched on, before I bring up other issues, I just wanted to ask very quickly. So this is also related to a poll question or a comment that has come within the chat. This is from William, and he's saying the cited cases negate the perception that a small match will ignite some violence. I think we tend to be overly negative about our country, and that fuels the low perception of peace in our country. What would your comment be to that?
For me, I'm speaking from a victim point of view, a victim point of view. So yeah. I don't think I would never think that there is peace and justice in my country when I know that over 1,000 families, if not more, in Ndebele and migrants don't know what happened to their relatives. They still don't have birth certificates. They still don't have, they failed. A lot of families that I've talked to, their parents were headmasters, they were soldiers, they were civil servants. They were killed during the 5th Brigade. They could not claim pensions because they didn't have death certificates. There are families who lost properties in town that were owned by their parents because they did not have the IDs to prove that the property belonged to their parents and they are the kids for those parents. We have a whole lot of young people who are in South Africa now. We recently published a documentary which maybe some people might have an interest in watching. It's called The Children of the Genocide. It's there on YouTube. People can search and watch challenges faced by young people whose they're no longer young. There are some of them in their 40s now and 30s, whose parents were killed during Gukurahundi. So for me, I have never known no peace in this country. For some of the people who always say the 80s were good years, but to me, 80s were the genocide years. Our parents were being killed. We suffered. we still feel that up to today. We still feel marginalized. We still feel excluded. We still feel that, you are invited just because, you need to have a mix. You just need one guy from Ndebele and add him. We are the afterthought. We don't matter. So what kind of peace is there?
I hear you. And my next question then would be just to find out. So recently, the president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, met with chiefs in Matabeleland, and the discussions were around Gukurahundi, and I think the resolution that came out of that was to allow a victim-centered process, which would involve exhumations and reburials where they need to take place. Do you feel, and I know this is a very difficult topic for you, and I know it's very emotive. I grew up in Bulawayo, so for a lot of people who did not grow up in Bulawayo, they probably do not understand the emotions that you're experiencing. I empathize completely, and I completely understand what you've experienced. I have friends and people that I know who lost family members and whose relatives have not been found today. So I completely understand. But I want us to have this conversation looking at it from a whole country perspective as well. So just looking at the progress that has happened, I know it is small. Do you feel that it is in the right direction? Do you feel that it is too little too late? Do you feel that there should be more of the same? So this is in context with the work that the president has already started to do. And I know, this is many years later, but what are your thoughts on that? Just that discussion, those discussions have started to take place. What would you say? Is that sufficient? Is that?
I don't think I would call it progress to start with.
Okay.
In 1998, the president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, then said he regretted Gukurahundi. He repeated in 1999 and said it was a moment of madness. And they said they were going to compensate the victims of Gukurahundi. Actually, a committee was set to work with the chiefs to come up with the names of people who were affected so that they could be compensated. And President Robert Mugabe then made a commitment to the committee that met him that he was going to talk to Herbert Murerwa, who was the Minister of Finance then, to include the compensation of Gukurahundi victims in the 1998 budget. That didn't happen. So in March, I think it was around March 29 or 28, 2018, when I was arrested at the State House, civil society people were going to meet the president. They came up with a 10-point plan. The 10-point plan included the issues of IDs, it included the issues of reburials, it included the issues of compensation of victims. Nothing happened. 2 years later, we come up with the same position again. The president meets the chiefs. He says, we are going to issue IDs. We are going to issue, the reburials are going to be on case-to-case basis. We are going to compensate the victims. It's now how many months? Nothing has happened. The president's statements are not law. So unless these things are turned into, statutory instruments or law, they will remain political talk. Because if you go now to the registrar's office and say, the president said we should get IDs, the guys at the registrar's office will tell you, our law says this is 1, 2 that you need to do for you to get an ID. So unless we find a law, unless there's a law that is put to back the words, it will be just the politicking. And we know 2023 is by the corner.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what you are calling for is, I think, just as quickly as we can put a statutory instrument into place for COVID-19, can we show as much political will with cases where we've had tension, such as this one?
The way we are so excited to come up with lockdowns and enforce them and put people in 14-day quarantines is the same thing that we can do with Gukurahundi victims. These people don't need a lot. They need IDs so that they can be filled to be citizens. So, there's a case that happened sometime this week and it has not been reported. I don't know why. In 1982, Tungamirai, I think it was Josiah Tungamira or someone, fired 250 Zipra guys in the army because they were in Ndebele. And he said, you know, the Madis and 250 of them were fired. And from that time, some of them have been challenging their dismissal from the army, saying that they actually want to be compensated. And it's only this week that they reached a deed of settlement where the government agreed that a wrong was done. These people are going to be compensated. But of the 250, how many are still alive? And how many of those who were fired from the army unjustly were able to, over these years, to be going to court every day at their own expense, wanting justice? So what is difficult? To go to parliament where the ruling party is a majority to come up with a law that says we need a statutory instrument, we need a law that will say anyone who can prove that their family was killed during Kukuraundo ABCD, we are going to give them birth certificates without no questions asked. We are talking about registration and voter registration in 2023. These people are now grandfathers and they have other kids, a whole generation doesn't. And I know Amnesty International has done a lot of work around these issues. So there are practical steps that can be done. We are not even talking about justice because I know it's not possible in this era. I'm just talking about people getting their IDs.
Right, I get you. I completely understand. And without, it seems for somebody who has an ID, they don't understand the value of that document. But for somebody who doesn't, you know, even just writing exams, finishing school, getting a job, you know, catching, going further to get a document to cross a border, all of those steps cannot take place if you don't have an ID. And as a result, your own children will not be able to be identified as Zimbabweans without that ID document. So I completely understand where you're coming from. And I think some of the basic steps that you said, I know we focus on one injustice, but of course there's a number of topics that we could discuss. But thank you very much for talking about that. And like I said, I know it's an emotive issue, and we don't take lightly any of the pain that people have experienced. Of course, this discussion, we want to create an understanding of how can we move forward as a country, as a united country, moving forward. So Zenzele, please stay on. We will have a discussion as well just shortly. But before we do that, I would like to call upon Deprose, Deprose Muchena. And Deprose is, I think Zenzele also referred to Amnesty International. Deprose is the regional director for East and Southern Africa for Amnesty International. And he's got a passion for leadership. He has a strong interest in human rights and doing research on extractive industries, economic development, social and economic justice, as well as advocacy. Mr. Muchena, thank you so much for making the time. I know you juggled a lot to be here today. I really appreciate your presence. What are your thoughts so far on what has been discussed? And as you are commenting on that, how would you say, you know, Zimbabwe fares with regards to strong institutions? Everybody's kind of touched on it in some way or form. But this would be your area of focus. We talked about peace. We've just done some aspects of justice. But what about strong institutions? Based on the conversation that we've had already and in the work that you do as Amnesty International.
Okay, thank you very much, Belinda, for framing it the way you have done, but also thank you to Civio for hosting this conversation and for inviting me to be part of it. Listening to the challenge of speaking last is that I was subtracting all the time the things that people were talking about, which I had planned to say. So there is little now left for me to say, but I must really pay tribute to Zenzele there, and not just for what he said today, but the work that he is doing, promoting justice and ensuring that memory is not destroyed for people who were persecuted by the state and since then have not found justice. And then also pay tribute to Trust, who spoke very much passionately about the role that peace plays, the dividends of peace, and what we need to do to find durable peace as a foundation cornerstone for prosperity. My sense is that, just touching on the last subject that Zenzele was talking about, we released a report we titled it "We Are Treated Like Animals," which is what a Cholocho woman spoke to us about, who has not had a birth certificate and a national ID for years because they are unable to produce a death certificate for their parent who was killed during Gugrahundi. And they're unable to produce a death certificate because no one wants to issue a death certificate, because you have to write cause of death on the death certificate. So the cause of death was gunfire, barrel of the gun. So nobody wants to account for how that person was killed. So she represented a whole generation of people who risk being stateless in a country that is independent for 40 years. And her story, which is the title of the report, speaks very much to the conditions I found in Ndebele when we're doing that research, in which at a school that we visited, which I will not name because I think it's important to just refer to the case. I found a school that had a total of 600 or 700 kids, primary school, and half of those kids did not have birth certificates, which means that they're not going to be able to write their national examinations. And it just represents social exclusion that makes it impossible for the whole country to participate in national conversation about Vision 2030, because a number of people feel excluded from the nation that we are talking about. So unless we think very seriously about reimagining national consolidation, reimagining national cohesion and national belonging, the conversations that we will be having will become elite conversations that are occupying the minds of elite strata people, who then look at everyone else who is not participating in that conversation as speaking ill of the country, and speak of the country with such a sense of privatization of the country as if it belongs to a few people. And I think that's the challenge that we have as we progress towards Vision 2030 for Zimbabwe to become an upper middle income economy. I want to start by dissecting the challenge I have with a notion of an upper middle income economy. Because we know that Zimbabwe is not going to be the first upper middle income economy in this region. South Africa is, Botswana is, Angola claims they are, Zambia declared themselves one, and there are a number of countries that are declaring themselves middle income countries. But embedded in these middle income countries are sort of four big challenges. The first one is that inside middle income countries is the triple burden of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. That is something that exists side by side the economic growth, because middle income or upper middle income is a nominal measure of the quantity of the economy divided by the population in that economy. It says much less about distribution impact of the proceeds of economy into human development. So I think it's not something that we should celebrate too much. We must challenge this to see the degree to which middle income status equates human development at a personal level. Because when we say middle income status means we have 12,000 GNP per capita, it doesn't mean that we will allocate that money to you. It's a nominal measure. It speaks about the economy, much less about the people. So there's that distinction between where people are at and where the economy is at. That's one big challenge of middle income economies. The second challenge is the developmental inclusiveness of the project inside middle income economies. And we see that in Namibia, we see that in Botswana. The third is social inclusiveness of middle income states and middle income economies. And the fourth is environmental inclusiveness. And the last one is inclusive financing. A lot of these middle income economies still grapple with financial inclusion. A lot of people are outside the banking sector, the financial sector, and therefore are affected by capacity to access capital so that they can go about doing their business. And so there is a problem in what we call upper middle income economies, because by themselves, they don't mean anything until the state comes in and intervenes to intercede between the processes of economic growth which takes place here, because you can grow the economy by 10% of gross domestic product every year and still retain higher levels of inequality and poverty. Because what simply happens is that when there is growth in Zimbabwe, the proceeds of growth are accessed by people who live in Borodebrook and not by people who live in Dzwaraseko. And until the state intervenes to direct the proceeds of growth into development by reducing inequality, so that you bring people at the bottom up for them to have an access to the proceeds of the national cake. The problem is actually that 10 years later, you actually go back to a threat towards peace, because those who do not have are constantly thinking about how to redistribute the economic assets themselves. This is why all the elite will have to put 6-meter walls around their houses and they sleep with one eye open at night because they are afraid of the poor. When the poor are not asleep, the rich are also not asleep. So we need something that needs to be done by the state in order to reduce the processes that we have here of growth and human development. And that is why the conversation about the role of institutions is important in Zimbabwe, but also in all social formations that came out of the so-called liberation movement. Because what happened at the liberation movement was that at independence, many of the states did not dismantle the authoritarian character of the colonial state. What they did was to expand its functional scope. So gradually what we have seen in most of Africa after independence is an emergence of a state that is actually predatory, a mafia state that essentially reproduces itself through primitive accumulation by supporting smaller groups of people in the elite and forgetting the rest of the population. So what you have is a state that is overrepresented where it is not needed and underrepresented where it is actually needed. So you want a state that is more present in victims of violence, victims of Cyclone Idai, victims of environmental degradation, and victims of human rights abuse. But you don't find the state there. You find the state represented in people who are trying to organize to hold it accountable. So even the supply of legislation is strongly associated with building an authoritarian project rather than a democratic state. So we have this challenge of a state that emerges out of colonialism, but refuses to reform and democratize in order for it to be accountable and therefore stand a better chance of offering a new vision of development and be taken seriously when the state is talking about middle income and so on. So the rhetoric, the character and the identity of the state needs to change in order for the progress towards Vision 2030 to be taken seriously, not on the basis of rhetoric, but on the basis of practical and meaningful steps that it takes. So that's one framing that I would put there, Belinda, that we need to discuss. I'm also concerned with institutions when we are talking about just the form of institutions versus the function of institutions. You know, there are two snakes that I have observed. One which is venomous and another which is just not venomous, but it looks like a snake. And what that snake, which is non-venomous, does is that it accumulates the benefits of looking like a snake when it is in fact not a snake. And many of our institutions mirror this reality. They look like institutions when in fact they are not institutions. They are institutions in form, but they're not institutions in function. Matt Andrews, in his book, The Limits of Institutional Reform to Development, introduces a concept of isomorphism, which is borrowed from sociology of organization as a discipline, where he says that many of our institutions today are suffering from what he calls isomorphic mimicry. In other words, they look like snakes, but they're actually not snakes, but they have the benefits of looking like snakes. Our institutions in Zimbabwe look like institutions. So you'll have the Peace Commission, you'll have the Electoral Commission, you'll have the Anti-Corruption Commission. They have the legitimacy of looking like institutions of state, but their delivery substantively is so limited that they are unable to advance this country towards becoming a middle income economy. So to get these institutions right, they actually need to be reformed so that the substantive delivery of their role matches the form. This is why you see a public parastatal board is obsessed with rewarding the occupants of the parastatal board with primitively accumulative wages that are frightening to look at. But when you look at the delivery of their mandate, it's very limited. So this gap between form and function of our institutions need to be reduced in order for us to have a fighting chance for these institutions to mediate the various contradictions that middle income and upper middle income societies have. The third challenge I press is our institutions tend to have institutions of strong men versus very weak institutions. So, and again, it's a character of the historical origin of our states, which come from fighting liberation wars, and they forget to democratize after independence. So what you see is very strong men occupying the state, but the state itself is weak. The state and these institutions are very strong when dealing with their own citizens, very weak when they are dealing with other states. You can see how the travel ban played out. Southern African states, with only 2 having identified this current variant, were subjected to travel ban. Did you see any coherent response by our states? The response that has been going on are by ordinary people. And this is why the bans will be reversed, because the West is seeing that it is now locked in combat, not against the African elite, by ordinary people now. So they are afraid more of ordinary people than they are of our states, because they know that our states are weak internationally. They are strong domestically. So this idea of strong men versus weak institutions is another issue that we need to reduce the gap by reforming the state and its institutions, so that institutions are stronger, more durable, more coherent, so that any occupant that comes into it, even they are Trump-like or any other dictator that can emerge, institutions remain durable and they are able to drive national development beyond the occupant of the state or of the institutions at the time we are having that conversation. Very, very important to strengthen our institutions beyond what they are and ensure that we weaken the strong men that occupy them. When we look at Zimbabwe over the last 30, 40 years, one of the strong undermining factors of our institutions to emerge, to become citadels of Vision 2030, is the degree to which legislation has been deployed, either to undermine institutions or to actually undermine the collective vision. What we tend to see most of the time is a rule of law is replaced with rule by law. You know, instead of ensuring that there is equity and subordination of everyone to the same standards of the law that we have, we see a selective application of the rule of law. So depending on who you are, if you are corrupt, it is possible that you simply make the nominal appearance at court, but because you are connected. If you are not connected and you're an ordinary person, it is very possible that you will languish in prison for many months to come, because the structure, the ideological construct of the state that I described, which is strong in form and weak in substance, is such that you constantly must protect the few that dominate the economy. And you must socialize all the problems of the country into the people. So we need to reduce this gap between the rule of law and rule by law. And I don't have time to go into most of the examples I would rather give you, but you can see it even when we have a constitutional framework which speaks about an independent judiciary and an independent parliament, and the Chapter 12 institutions that we celebrate as undergirding our democracy. One of the challenges that we really have is that we have tended to see what I call judicial minimalism. Judicial minimalism is a process that takes place when judges look at a case before them, and if they see executive interest in that case, they are minimalist in their application of the rules of law. They are minimalist in their capacity to dissect what is before them. So they participate in the process of political persecution in the name of prosecution, right? So persecution through prosecution. what is happening to a young man called Makomborero Arizivishe. He is persecuted in the name of prosecution. So when you are looking from outwardly, you think there is a process going on of prosecution. But substantively, what is happening is persecution. This is what happens to civil society activists. This is what happens to political opponents. This is what is happening in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. And it's not just unique to Zimbabwe. We saw that in Zambia, in Mozambique, in Angola. We also saw that in Nigeria, Kenya. Because the character of the states and institutions in these post-colonial formations are such that they are much more at the service of the state rather than at the service of the people. Now, Vision 2030, progress towards middle income economy, is impossible if we don't reform these institutions so that they are more people-centered, they are more durable, they serve the constitutional spirit and serve less individuals that occupy them. The last point I want to mention, because we don't have time again, is that our institutions don't need to be tested on the degree to which how strong they are. I think we must look at our institutions and test them on the basis of how capable they are. So a capability framework of institutions is something, in my view, that we should be looking at rather than simply strong. Because strong as a word has been used to demonstrate toxic power, the toxic masculine state institutions, in which power is exercised over rather than power exercised with. And to achieve this, I think the value of leadership is vital because it is oftentimes the missing link to effective state institutions that are performing a national good. What we tend to see across the landscape is what I call leadership by perspiration, not leadership by inspiration. You are an accidental leader. You were there at the time we set up this thing, so we simply ask you to step in. We need to see leadership in public state institutions as a public entrepreneurial role that you are playing on behalf of others. This is a leadership I call beyond you leader. You're not thinking of yourself to instrumentalize the role of a leadership responsibility in state institutions for primitive accumulation of wealth. But we are looking at you as providing a leadership that augments national cohesion and directs the proceeds of peace much more equitably through different genders, generations, and capabilities of people, including those without the necessary abilities that we have. So if we can develop a coherent framework of accompanying Vision 2030 by looking and auditing quite objectively and without fear or favor the character of our institutions, I think we will move this debate forward. And by 2030, we'll actually be looking at something that is real. Because it's not the first time that a promise has been made of something to be done in years to come. When I was a student, I grew up on the diet of housing for all by 2000, health for all by 2000, education for all by 2000. When 2000 came, there was nothing left except leftovers, because the generation that was talking about health for all by year 2000 ate up everything on the table, including the delivery of housing, including the delivery of health. This is why we are littered with cases of grand corruption that have not been consummated, but those of small corrupt activities, the spotlight on them are more significant. So we need to have the courage to tackle the big stories, to tackle the big issues, because I think if we do that, we get back to, in my view, what the first speaker was talking about when he was talking about prosperity. Because the opposite of prosperity is failure. There is a book called Why Nations Fail by Acemoglu and Robinson, which I have been reading, which I think is a good recommended text. And in that story, it's a very hopeful story that they are talking about. At the end of the day, their conclusion is what makes a nation succeed or fail. It's institutions, and its institutions. And inside those institutions are capable people who are committed to country more than to themselves, who are patriots. And patriotism is not what is being defined in the bill that's coming. Patriotism is love for your country all the time and your government when they deserve it. And when they don't deserve it, it's very patriotic to call governments out for accountable governance. So I hope that we can do this as part of our accompaniment of Vision 2030 towards middle income status, to know that middle income status is an aspiration. It's a nominal description of countries. It's not a substantive identity of a poor person in Mondoro. A poor person in Mondoro, until the states meet them where they are, they will remain poor in a middle income state. They will remain where they are in a middle income state. The state of inclusion and effective inclusion of those feeling marginalized by state policy, including what Zenzele raised, will be the test upon which we can challenge or see the effectiveness of Vision 2030 and middle income status. I hope with that I can just leave it there, and if there are questions, I can take them on. Thank you, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Deprose. That was really good, really, really good. Thank you so much for bringing up those important points. I think going back even to what Trust was discussing, that if an institution is not delivering on the basics, on the very things that it was created for, you're not going to have a peaceful society. And you've just talked about how we need to have we need to be understanding that the institution needs to be capable, not just strong, but it needs to be capable to achieve what it was put in place for. So that applies across the board. So for our schools as institutions, our hospitals, our ministries, everything, even our churches, they need to deliver on what they were created for. So this is a challenge, not just to political leaders, or people in the civil society, but I think it's a challenge across the board for Zimbabweans as well to want to call out where there is lack of capability, where there's lack of delivery, where there's a poor performance. We should be open to calling that out. I've got a question, and I think this is based on the comments that you've made, but it's actually directed to Trust. Deprose talked about how post-colonial institutions generally serve the state rather than the individual. And this is to Trust. Just to find out, in your index, in your research.
We have questions for Depo, lots of them.
Oh, you've got, okay, all right.
So let's wait on Trust. We'll come back to the peace guy. Let's talk to the isophomic mimicry guy.
Okay, all right. Would you like to share the questions, Dr. Mrisa?
Yeah, so I'll start off by reading what Lina Muchena said, wrote. She says, from the presentation, we then can simply say there's need to tighten and make sure we achieve the rule of law, separation of power and democracy so as to be able to achieve Vision 2030. Well, I wish it was that easy, but anyway, I don't know how you deal with it, because I was going to ask you to say, I totally get it, and I'm in agreement, but we live in a world of 3 steps to this, 5 steps to this. What do we do after this? You know what I mean? If I believe there's some colleagues here from government, what are their takeaways? What do they need to be thinking about, especially when we talk about capabilities of institutions? You are muted, Debo. You're muted.
Okay, yeah, no, I think the short answer, Dr. Mrisa, is we must carry our own cross and walk our own journey. We tend to have, governments and state institutions must see citizens as shareholders in the state building project. They must not see citizens as enemies of the state and draw a list in which you go after citizens and create insecurity for them. When you do that, you reduce the degrees of national cohesion and national consolidation, because you are frightening citizens from participating in state building for accountability. Trust spoke about the harvest of fear and stockpiles of peace. Those things can only happen if the state and its institutions are signaling that you are welcoming here. You are welcome here. And so I think the state must see citizens as partners. If you look at the reform agenda that was promoted in Parliament at the end of the decade of the 1990s, it created a new Parliament in 2000. Our Parliament did not have portfolio committees before. It had select committees. For the first time since 2000, we actually saw accountability in action when portfolio committees emerged, monitoring the degree to which public policy was being executed, linking up with citizens, and ensuring that the legislative process was much more broad, democratic, and so on. Of course, we manipulate parliamentary processes to produce terrible legislation, but the reform of Parliament and the engagement between Parliament and citizens between 2000 to 2005 was the result why the NGO bill was defeated. The NGO bill, its first incarnation, it's coming for the second time, was defeated because a ZANU-PF MP, who was chair of the Portfolio Committee on Public Service, conducted a public hearing at the Rainbow Hotel there, and 500 people came with organizations to say, we do not want to close civic space. It was Parliament that defeated that bill. It was Parliament that was exposing the ugly nature of the Public Order and Security Act, the Access to Information and Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, and so on. It was Parliament that was doing that. It is no longer doing that now, but it's just doing that by way of what I call form, because the manipulation of parliamentary processes are such that Parliament is not effectively playing its role. But I come to the conclusion, Dr. Mrisa, that the state and its institutions must see citizens as partners in development. The cries that Zenzele was talking about should not continue to become the defining part of the discourse between the state and its citizens. But the state must see us as partners in order for us to produce what you were saying at the beginning, morning, that, you know, citizens outside of Zimbabwe are prospering in a way that you are so surprised. 2 days ago, fantastic interview on travel bans by Dr. Marty Hlosha. She's the director of health at the city of St. Louis in Missouri in the US, Zimbabwean. The guy who is producing these Pfizer vaccines at Pfizer is a Zimbabwean scientist. The person who found the variant in Botswana is a Zimbabwean scientist working in Botswana. I was traveling recently via Qatar airport, and I was looking for something else and looking lost, and somebody came to me and greeted me, and I spoke to him. What's your name? Mtlatla. The guy runs the airport in Qatar, at Qatar airport. He's from Blawayo there. So a lot of our people who are now looking to go out to prosper need to not necessarily come back. They can develop the country from where they are. The people who are inside Zimbabwe need to feel that they belong to the country. And the direction, the indicator, the identity, the DNA comes from the behavior of the state towards its own citizens. You don't wake up and say on Twitter, everybody who is coming back is now quarantined on arrival at your own cost, and you will take a piece. It's almost, the guy is taking pride in projecting command policies, the kind of policies that created disjuncture between citizens and the state. This gap needs to be narrower. When it is narrower, then citizens will become participants in isolation, in fighting isolation, in dealing with sanctions, and in representing you effectively outside when you are not there, because the state is not everywhere. Citizens are everywhere. So I think the colleagues in government who are on the webinar can of course say, but I'm not sure that they will be able to say. Some of them will not be able to say what I'm saying, but I think they understand what I'm saying. There's too much of a gap between the state and the people inside the country.
Thank you so much, Deprose. Dr. Mrisa, did you have another question that you wanted to put forward?
No, I'm happy, but I see there are quite a number of issues being raised, but I'm happy. Thanks, Depo, for that.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay. A comment here from Tolbert, before I go to my question, a comment from Tolbert who says, on point, Deprose, deep insights, the gap between form and function of institutions needs to be reduced. Institutions must be strengthened and built for the long term, And he then emphasizes again, rule of law versus rule by law. We read the comment from Lynn Lina, and trust says capable institutions, beautiful. Carlos, I think he was still connected, says great points, Deprose, on the importance of institutions and their auditing. Rumbizo says well articulated. And Pilani says great clarity in highlighting the gap between the people and the government. Now, I'm going to go to my question. I think this might be between Trust and Deprose. You guys can hash it out. I was going to touch on the book that you've referred to, Why Nations Fail, and how it was emphasizing that institutions are the key determining factor for growth. I think also the book talks about critical junctures as well, critical moments in time linked to strong institutions. But Trust, just wanted to find out from the research that you have done, is that actually the case? When you're looking at peace and when you're looking at prosperity, and then you're also looking at strong institutions, is that actually the case? Is that what you have found on the ground? Where there are stronger institutions or more inclusive institutions, I think the book actually talks about creating inclusive institutions. Is that the case, that you would have more peace, that you would have more prosperity in those countries?
Okay, thanks. I'll go first. In case my big brother goes first, I won't have anything to say. Yes, we have empirical data, we have empirical evidence that shows that there's a very strong correlationship between strong institutions and peace and the prospects for peace. In other words, where we have strong institutions, natural fact, I'm feeling bad about using strong institutions after learning about capable institutions. Where we have capable institutions, I think we have seen a very direct correlation with the peace rankings, whether negative peace or positive peace. But again, I need to quickly say that one of the things that we need to disabuse ourselves of is always thinking in terms of cause and effect, causality and effect. Things don't exactly work that way in real life. In real life, when you see someone sick, it is not because they just walked through the rain. It is not because yesterday they did something funny. It could be because of what happened 10 years ago. It could be because of what happened 20 years ago. It could be because of what is happening at that moment. Now, we need to learn to look at things outside the causality way of looking at things. Now, coming to peace, whether it's issues of peace and justice and strong institutions, I was particularly touched by what my brother Zenzele was talking about. It's easy to dismiss what happened in Ndebele while you are sitting in the comfort of your house here in Harare and not be able to connect the dots of what exactly happened or transpired more than 30 years ago. Yet we have someone today who is not employed, who is not employable for the simple reason that they could not afford school fees, not because they were lazy, but the parents died. Now that shows you that cause and effect don't work that way. We may actually even say they were given a scholarship, but forget about the trauma aspects of having gone through that kind of phase. So cause effect is not how we need to grapple with matters. We need to look at a very, very holistic, deep way of thinking, and then be able to say, how do we change these vicious cycles? Because they are cycles. We have cyclical violence in Zimbabwe. You can almost say that from 1896, this one beat this one and this one. 10, 20 years later, this one was beating up this one. 40 years later, this one was in this one's neck. There's a vicious cycle. The Ndebele issues, the Murambatsina issues, the Kukuraund issues, the 2008 political violence, these are cyclical patterns. It's a cycle. And for you to stop a cycle, when you put a nudge, we need to calculate not just the impact of our nudge on the cycle, but the holistic approach to dealing with the cycle so that it turns from a virtuous cycle, from a vicious cycle to a virtuous cycle. Thanks. I hope that speaks to something.
Yes, it does. Deprose, if you have any comments there, and then also if you could respond to Kennedy, who said, Deprose, what should I do as a patriotic Zimbabwean in search of this Vision 2030 upper middle income status? Tough question, but I know you'll do well.
To Kennedy, what should you do? Don't be apathetic. Don't, I don't subscribe to this apathy, not voting. No, it's more of the same and just throwing our hands in the air, because nothing changes except when we get involved. So I would encourage you to not be apathetic, to participate, and being here is evidence of participation. What you do with what we're discussing in your own community is the challenge that you have, and in your own church organization and so on, so that we populate every landscape with a national conversation about nation building. I really think that we have a responsibility as citizens to provide the test that a vision ought to have. And if we are not there, the state can have dialogue with itself, and they are very happy to do that. So we have to be engaged. I completely agree with Trust that unless sometimes you have been part of a process of injustice, when people are talking about injustice, you think they are anti the country. You place yourself on a citadel and a pedestal, a person who decides what is country and what is not country. And I think that's part of what we need to do, again, back to Kennedy. We need to actually invest in knowing our history. We need to know where we have come from in order to understand where we are going. Some of the policies that were adopted in the 1920s are still in place. It was not until the late 90s that the Water Act of 1927 was still being used to govern a post-colonial state, with its inequality about access to water more towards commercial farms, up until it was reformed in 2001. So we need to know where we are coming from. The spirit of segregation of the Land Apportionment Act, which concludes by saying until such time the native has progressed on the ladder of civilization, the points of contact between whites and black must be kept apart. The inequality that concluding statement created in 1930 has been replaced by class instead of race. So there is an embedded togetherness between classes of people beyond race to protect inequality that started in the 1930s. So for us to deal with inequality today, we need to understand where we are coming from. And I would imagine that in our conversation, we should be forward-looking, but we must never stop looking at the rearview mirror, because it tells us where we are going, and it's a yardstick for ambition setting. Now, on the final question that I need to say, just on this state institutions or institutions in general and their role in building momentum towards Vision 2030, towards becoming a middle income or upper middle income economy. One of the interesting things that we should always remember is that development institutions in any country, including in Zimbabwe, are not just historical coincidence. They are products of forces of contestation, of struggle. They are products of fierce debates between those who want to move forward, saying we can no longer continue to take, as Martin Luther says, the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, but we must respond to the fierce agents of now. And those that believe that we must move lockstep based on historical precedents. So we must know that what we say development institutions are products of these things, of history, of our struggles, of forces of the past, such that if people who have been involved in history making are involved today, the prospects of them making the same mistakes they made before are higher if we don't inject new blood in political discourse, in economic discourse, and social discourse. If you killed someone during the war, you can kill someone during peace, because killing the enemy for you is an act of revolutionary justice. So all you need to do is to identify a person as an enemy, and then it's very easy to kill them. So we must constantly discuss the values of good, the values of togetherness, and the values of peaceful contestation of futures of the country in such a way that these values find a place to sit in our discourse. So diversity of political sentiment should be promoted. We should promote active citizenry. We should promote accountable governance, because in the absence of accountable governance, even when you are getting your pro-poor policies right as a country, faulty governance nullify the impact. So we need to reform governance in order to achieve economic prosperity. And that does not happen in parliament and in the bureaucracy. It happens when we, the people, are actively involved. And that's where I want to end. We, the people, are the beginning, are the past, and are the future. The future of Zimbabwe and the Zimbabwe of the future does not lie in government. It lies in the people for which government serves. Government is at the service of the people, not the other way around.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm gonna highlight something quickly. This was a comment that was made by Elliot Mandaza. And I would just like to call back Zenzele just to make a quick comment on this. So Elliot was saying the process of engagement that Zenzele has described involves the church. And he mentioned that he was in a meeting where this issue was flagged as in a manner consistent with trust's tenure focus on positive peace. There is need for the political leadership to allow the process to flow without their restrictions. An open process will have greater fruit than the potential explosion of trying to bury it. So Zenzele, what would your comment be to that? So do you feel that an open process is going to have greater fruit rather than burying it? And then secondly, who do you think should be at the center of bringing a kind of consolidating the work that you would like to see happening? You've focused a lot on Burundi in your conversation, but also just thinking broadly about many other points of injustice. You know, we've had political tensions, we've had Murambatrina, we've had election violence, all of those. Who do you think should be at the center of bringing together citizens, government, and anyone else involved to bring the country forward?
I think the problem with Zimbabwe is that the biggest perpetrator when it comes to human rights abuses is the state. So it becomes problematic when the state is the one that wants to lead the problems or to lead the processes of finding peace. So ideally, the National Peace and Reconciliation process was fine if it was meant by people who are of independent mind, who are independent in their thinking, who are not asking for favors from the state. Then the way it started, it looked like it was going to get somewhere. But the moment the other characters started coming in and we started to question, especially when you know that the person was a prosecutor during Kukuraundi, you then ask, who is he protecting? So this is where we then say, does the church has the muscle and the stature to actually solve the problems? Can the state allow the church to lead the process? The church has played a significant role in our politics. If you remember the Catholic Church, for even during the war, they were mediating. In the 80s, the church actually played a big role in trying to stop the Kukuraundi genocide. And even in the 2000s, the church played a big role. So yes, there is need to have a dialogue, have these issues solved rather than trying to ignore them, because they are not going to go away. The younger generation is getting angrier and angrier, more so because they don't understand what happened and they don't have the full detail. So, but I don't think the perpetrator can be the best person to lead the process of peace building in Zimbabwe.
Do you feel the church could play that role? I know you've questioned whether they would have the muscle, but do you feel that as a start, they could do that? Elliot,
Yeah, if we are talking about the church, not some of the churches that I've seen with, all sorts of other agendas. So who is the church? If we have God-fearing men who really will stand with the victim and the perpetrator, then yes, they can find a way of leading. Because we need someone who will be neutral in finding, to bring these parties to the table and provide solution. I'm always against the idea of saying, the government should just apologize. The apologizing is the last part. First of all, you acknowledge the wrong was done. Then, have processes in place to make sure that the wrong is not done. Because the moment you say sorry, we cannot talk about it because we will not apologize. But we need truth telling. What happened? And then from there we can then say, okay, so what, from here, where do we go? So if the church is capable, but now we have, like everything in Zimbabwe, the opposition, the ruling party, there are so many factions. So there also a certain faction of the church that thinks there's also another faction that thinks, no, the government is doing the right thing. So yeah.
Okay, all right. And just as a comment to you, I'm not sure if you've been watching the comment section, but this was from Tendai Mrisa, who says, it's a very critical discussion here. Thank you, Zenzele, for raising all these issues, not only on this platform, but in your day-to-day work. The genocide was real, and there's need to find ways of resolving these issues. And of course, just to say, we completely understand, and we are fully aware of the impact that the Gukurahundi had. So we don't downplay it in any way. And I think I would like to end our discussion here. But before I do, I don't always get a chance to give my comments as a facilitator, and this is the last dialogue. So I'll steal whilst I can. I think today's discussion has been a very good one. And yeah, just unity is quite important. But one thing that most of our presenters have not mentioned quite a lot is just the need for us to deal with our racial tensions as well. So just as much as we have a colonial history that we need to deal with, I think we also need to deal with our race relations and just how we relate together as different races. As much work as one race needs to do with the other, it applies both ways. So this applies not just in the laws that we create, but also in the way that we then relate to people of different races. Same applies to people of different genders. So that would be my 2 cents. I won't go into too much detail there. I would like to call upon Dr. Marisa to give closing remarks to frame today's discussion in light of where do you think we will take this series? The comments, questions that have come through, the insights, amazing insights that we've had from all the panelists that have come on board since the 22nd of September. What should we expect next? Dr. Marisa, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so maybe first allow me to embarrass you, to thank you publicly for the great work that you have done in carrying this work and doing an incredible job of pulling it together, putting us together. Today was a very important conversation and also very sensitive and very emotional. I was glad that we got my brother Zenzele to come and speak in the way he spoke. And I think that's the essence of a dialogue. A dialogue is about being authentic. A dialogue is about coming in and really talking about the real issues. So I think also from your leadership, Belinda, when you began to say, oh, let's do away with PowerPoints. Let's talk. We need to really talk. Because I think our country is a country in need of dialogue. Half the time we speak over each other. We rarely have time to listen. My concern has always been about government. Government comes when you are inviting them to say, come and make a keynote, etc. But today I was impressed. We got a colleague who's from government. She just sat in the back and she's been taking notes, talking to me back and forth, which is important because we also want a government that has got capability to listen, a listening government, because democracy is not just about being voted into power, but it's also about representing the interests of citizens, not only the majority, but all of us as Zimbabweans. You can only do that if you are a listening government. I think it's a huge prerequisite that we are finding as an issue now, because our governments are so sold out to technocratic approaches and we miss out on people. So this expert-led cult that we have now, that this person is an expert in this and that, etc., we miss out on having real conversations. So I think it's very important for us to really try to invest in a culture of talking. Of course, COVID-19 has sort of been a challenge, but also it allowed us to use technology to have conversations. Resource scarcity is an issue. I don't think we'll have been able to carry 6 conversations at a public facility. But at some point, these conversations were hitting around 250 people, 180, 200, thereabouts, saying to us that there is quite a huge interest in this. So I think it's about myself and the leadership at Civil, Belinda included, to come back to the drawing board to say, how do we take this work forward? Because it's very important, it's needed. How do we carry this work forward? How do we make sure that we do not lose the momentum? The challenge is always about losing momentum, because our objective was never about saying, oh, by the time we are done with the 6th webinar, all the Zimbabweans will know about Vision 2030. It's impossible. But to create an interest in interrogating this, because the way we were given Vision 2030, it was just a document that we picked up that government has got this. But for the kind of democracy we want, that's not the process. Government scores a 0 there as far as I'm concerned, because we need to be involved in the core designing, the core creation of such a document. If we're going to be, like Deprose has urged us, not to be apathetic, but to be involved. But we can only be involved or engaged in something that we've been sort of been a part of. So at the moment, we still have a challenge to do with government on the other side and citizens on the other. And there's a huge bridge. We need to find a way of coming together, finding common ground, finding ways of moving forward. It's a challenge that we're facing. So it cannot be resolved over 6 webinars. We hope that you'll hear from us at the beginning of 2022. We are going to take a bit of a rest. It's been a very hectic marathon throughout the year. Some of you were in our previous dialogue yesterday, so there have been a lot of dialogues. So the team really needs to rest, recuperate, and then we'll come back. We'll definitely have a program to be announced in January, how we're moving forward. It will be a pity if we left it here because it's hanging. We need to proceed to begin to interrogate where we are on the issues that we've already discussed and what needs to be done. So we bring accountability, we bring co-production, we bring citizens back on the table. Like Deprose has already told us that at the end of the day, it's the citizens who matter, not the government. The citizens should drive the agenda of Vision 2030. Thanks again, colleagues, for making it and for sort of providing us with support, for all the resource persons that we've engaged with in the 6-part dialogue. Thank you so much for your invaluable support. We cannot even place a dollar value on the things that you have done. We are so grateful. And if we do not speak again, happy holidays, colleagues.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Murisa. And this brings us to the end of our 6-part dialogue series on Vision 2030. Like I said, this was episode 6 or dialogue 6. You can catch all of our dialogues on Facebook, on the Civil Institute Facebook page, also on the Heart and Soul and Newsday Facebook pages. They are all under Vision 2030. Like I said, we've gone from the need for a vision process to an overview of where Zimbabwe is at. We've looked at the economy, we've looked at trade relations, agriculture, mining, social policy, all of that. And today was peace, justice, and strong institutions. My name is Belinda Chaura once again. I've been your facilitator. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.